Thanks for joining everybody. Tonight we have a value-added producer grant with Steven Ussery from Stewards Unlimited. Just kind of to kick this off, this is the first out of a series of webinars that we'll be hosting over throughout the spring and even into the summer. And the next one after tonight, the next one is the 21st, and that's going to be Marketing 101 with Matt LaRue from Cornell Extension. And so you'll be getting more information about that if you're signed up on our email list. If you have any questions along the way, the Q&A is open, and we'll open those up at the end. And then just keep abreast of all the information that we have. It will all be on sell.choplocal.com. And so all the information will be hosted there. And so, yeah, just encourage everybody to check that out. And so to kick it off, my name's Mark Putney. I'm the Director of Business Development for Chop Local. And if you're not familiar with us, we are basically an online farmers market for meat. We kind of coined the Etsy of meat, and that's kind of has been a kind of gets a chuckle out of everybody. But so yeah, we just our main goal is to empower farmers and butcher shops to be able to sell meat online direct to consumer. And so we have all of the tips and tricks to do that, as well as a wonderful platform of tools and vendor tools that we have that enable all of that payment processing and order processing. So we're just very excited for everybody to be here. And I'd like to introduce Sydney, is our newest member of Local. And so she's sitting in tonight, and she will be working on some more webinars as we continue to get down this. Sorry, we can't figure out the chat right now. So we will just put any questions in the Q&A there, and we can address those then. So anyway, so that's let me go back here. So yeah, I'm gonna let Steven take over here. Steven Ussery is from Stewards Unlimited, and I'm gonna let you kick it off, and then we can we'll answer a bunch of questions at the end. And so Steven, if you can grab the share there. Very good.
How does that look? Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Mark, and the Chop Local team for facilitating this webinar. It's a lot of work that goes into organizing something like this. So thank you so much for doing all this and making us be able to connect and learn a little bit more about this great opportunity. So as Mark said, my name is Steven Ussery, and I'm the founder of Stewards Unlimited. And so today we're going to be talking about the value-added producer grant. And so as a disclaimer, the 2023 value-added producer grant, or VAPG as some will call it, has not actually officially been released yet. So insights and recommendations today are going to be based on previous years. It usually doesn't change too much year to year, and so it shouldn't be a problem. And there are some points where I'll point out as we go through where this might be something that would change or how it would impact your decisions. Ultimately, 95% is going to be about the same. I just like being able to present on it early because I think there's so much benefit to being able to do your planning process and go through everything ahead of time rather than waiting until it's officially released and then you're kind of under the gun a bit. So for a brief outline of what we're going to be covering today, we'll talk about why the funding is important, how it's a great fit for first grant applications, how to use what you're currently doing and leverage that, then what the things in the application you actually need, and then how to build off of that into more business development in the future. So I think that this funding is extremely important, and the value-added producer grant is one of my favorite grants. Our firm specializes in USDA grant. So we do a pretty wide gambit, but the value-added producer grant is probably by far my favorite because I think that farmers provide a valuable social service. And it's Wendell Berry that says, good farmers who take seriously their duties as stewards of creation and of their land's inheritors contribute to the welfare of society in more ways than society usually acknowledges or even knows. And I know that we have a lot of fishermen and women on this call today, and I think the same sentiment stands true regardless of whether it's a farmer, producer, or harvester. I think that the focus on sustainability, caring for the land, for the water, is really important. And I think that this funding opportunity really empowers people that have that ethos, Along those lines, I think the value-added producer grant is actually one of the best grants for your first funding application. So I know a lot of people on this call have probably not done too much with grants, or if they have, very small ones on a state level, maybe to the NRCS, something like that. The value-added producer grant is actually focused on increasing producer revenue and customer base, which are, when you're thinking about the two things that you need to do to grow your business, those are as basic as you can get. And they specifically mention that they're focused on small and mid-sized family farms. And then they have specialty points for beginning farmers, veterans, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, people that maybe haven't had the same capacity to be as large. And so the smaller size, oftentimes people who are thinking more along the lines of regenerative practices, or who want to they don't want to scale and only think about the money. That I think this is a really good opportunity for. It's definitely applicable for producers of any size, but this is one of the rare ones where the smaller guys can have a really good chance. So applicants get to choose between doing a planning grant, where essentially they would develop a business plan, maybe a marketing strategy, or a working capital grant for implementation of a strategy. I'll tell you the truth. I don't know that I've ever worked on a planning grant, because almost always you can do some of the planning and make it sound good and just go straight for the working capital. It is kind of a toss up. And if you're doing a really large expansion or a really large project, sometimes the planning grants can be relevant, but oftentimes, as long as you can justify and you've thought through the process, the working capital grant is the one that you would probably be going for. I know that Mark did mention this at the beginning, but I'll probably also just keep going. I see that there are some questions popping up. I'll probably wait until the very end just to make sure that we cover our baseline, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. All right. So what is the definition of value added? A lot of people think that they have to go out and do something completely new, but the definitions that they use are that it undergoes a change of physical state. There's something that will enhance its value, or it's aggregated and marketed as a locally produced food. So all this to say that most people can take what they're doing and qualify in some way. So especially for if you're selling locally and want to market it as a local product, as long as you're able to get kind of a price point or a premium that's above like a wholesale market, or something that is just you're selling as a commodity. As soon as you're turning it into a product and you're doing direct sales and you're attaining some more of that value, you're able to apply for this. So if you are doing any direct to consumer sales, you are very likely able to qualify. There are a couple of other eligibility requirements. For a grant, you have to produce 50% of the commodity. So what this actually means, most people think that they can only do it with their own products. The exciting thing about this is that as long as you're producing, say, 51%, the grant can actually fund you to purchase additional commodity on top of what you produce in order to make this product. So say you raise beef, and you have 10 head, you can actually buy an additional 9 and process it in order to make your beef cuts and sell that as your value added product. And the grant can help you to purchase that additional commodity. Grant funding, unfortunately, cannot be used for buying land, buildings, or fixed equipment. So I know that we also probably have a fair amount of people who do some of their own processing here. And while labor involved with processing and some other things are eligible, you can't actually buy anything that's large. Usually the threshold is around $5,000. Anything that's above that, it starts to be considered equipment and it's large. And usually we're not able to invest in those things with this particular opportunity. You can rent or lease them. So there isn't their opportunity if you're reliant on it, but purchasing it outright or doing a lease to own is just not going to be eligible. Grants do have to be for under 36 months. Usually I'm recommending that people will aim for about a year period, because the thing about this, you can't apply for another grant if you have one open, but most people have more than one product. And so if you are able to do a grant that lasts a year and wrap it up, close it out, then you're able to apply for another one in the future and continue to grow your business, and without having one that's just dragging on long term. And you do also have to be one of the following in this list. Most people will probably fall under an individual independent agricultural producer. So just means that you produce it. Harvesters are also eligible. So there are some other nuanced points, but I'm more than happy to answer specific questions or help you understand if you are eligible. But this is kind of the baseline, and most people are going to qualify under this if you are producing a commodity yourself. Excuse me. So for the particular opportunity, usually after it is released, you're going to have 60 to 90 days to prepare an application. Last year was 60 days, which is shorter than average. Usually it's about 90. But that means that you have 2 months to prepare everything. And our service, we take about a month to go through the process with a client. And even with us as a professional service, helping and doing a lot of the work, we still need like up to 20 hours of investment from the client to make sure that we're getting the information from them that we need, that we're getting everything ironed out and everything's consistent. And so I say this all to say that if you wait until it's released, or you think, oh, 2 or 3 months, that's plenty, it can really sneak up on you and it can easily get overwhelming. And so that's why we're having this webinar now, so that people can start at least thinking about what they'd like to be doing if they want to apply, and get those balls rolling. Usually
Sorry, I'm going to jump in quick. So last year it was kind of right in that March timeframe, right? When they released it. Do you have an idea? Is it probably be around the same time, or what are you thinking?
Probably. I've heard probably in like mid-February, but technically it's been under review since October. So
Okay.
it's usually, though, it comes out somewhere January, February, or March. Last year was really late, and that's why they made it the 60 days instead of the 90. Usually it's due by March, maybe April of each year. So yeah, that's why it's kind of like we don't quite know. Hopefully they'll release it soon enough that we'll have the 90-day window again this year.
Yeah, but at any rate, it's good to get your ducks in a row now and get, if you're looking at this. So this is great.
Yeah. And also it's, at least now you can be brainstorming, because, there probably will be other informational webinars on it after it's released. And so being able to think through it now, so that then you'll have kind of hit up with some roadblocks by the time these other opportunities come along. And then maybe you'll be able to ask even more nuanced questions that could help you along on the way. So normally the funding is a 1-to-1 match. What that means is that if you're applying for a $50,000 grant, you have to provide $50,000 of value as a contribution. So planning grants can be up to $75K, which means that you can apply for $75,000 and you have to provide up to $75,000, and the total project together ends up being $150,000, right? The working capital, you can apply for $250,000, meaning that the entire project needs to be a $500,000 project. And so I've seen that a lot of clients are actually end up being limited by the amount of their own match, right? The amount that they're able to contribute reduces the amount that they are actually able to apply for. And a lot of the work that I do is trying to help people finagle it and figure out how to maximize the grant that they can get with their resources. So there are 3 types of matching. There's a cash match, which you use either like a bank account, a line of credit. You just have to show that you can access the money. You don't actually have to use it. A lot of people will try to plan out their project so that they can cash flow the project, and then they don't have to, you're not pulling out of the 401k or anything like that. You just have to show that you have access to it. Maybe a third party can vouch for you and say that they have the money as well. This is the best way. In the past, there have been actually extra evaluation points where they specifically said, we'll give you more points if you have the cash match. That's likely not going to happen this year, maybe, but probably not. But it's still better just from an evaluation perspective when somebody's looking at it and looking at the amount of work that has to go into the other two options. So the other one is owner labor. You can do up to half of your match can be your own labor, meaning it can be 25% of the total project. In order to use this, though, you do have to have a reputable timekeeping system. And so you can't just say, I spent 10 hours doing something. You do have to have a system of something like time cards, or something like a payroll system that can track hours and make sure that things are recorded properly. And so that oftentimes is a pretty big barrier for a lot of people. They don't want to start keeping a time card. And so that's something that we can talk, that you'll want to think through, right? The last one is raw commodity inputs. This is the value of your commodity that's being processed. This is a good option, but it can have some pitfalls. One of them being that it will depend somewhat on your local rural development office, because they're the ones who help administer the grant, and they're going to help you to cross out something called program income from the grant. And so when you use your raw commodity as your match, it makes that process more difficult. And so if you have a rural development office that's not wanting to put in that effort, it can end up with being a kind of a hazard later down the line. And so I try to avoid it when possible. We try to focus on the cash match when as much as we can. And then it makes things go a little bit smoother, but they all are options, and being able to use all three is usually the best strategy. So another big point is that simple applications are competitive. You don't need to make a new product. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I'll usually work with people to just figure out the things that they're already doing and then frame that as a product. You can't apply for the same product over and over again, but you can apply. A lot of people have not ever applied for it. And so you can apply with the product that you've been making for 20 years for this as a way to expand your marketing for it, right? Or to expand, to offset your processing costs. So an example is that it could pay for a beef producer to process their livestock, and then to pay for things like shipping, labels, farmers market fees, things like that. If you're sending it out in the selling process, it can't be related at all to production, but anything after the point of processing is going to be eligible. And so it can pay for both the processing and then also the marketing and advertising, which is, I've seen a really big benefit to a lot of clients where, maybe they've been doing their own marketing, they have their social media, and they've just done something every once in a while. They've never marketed. All their customers have come to them because their product is so good. And they've never had to look outwards. And this is oftentimes an opportunity for them to start looking outwards and exploring if they want to scale their production a little bit more, or to find that optimal balance of how much they want to produce and how much they want to sell. And then with the really complex grants, a lot of little expenses just ends up being a lot of admin work for you guys. You do reporting on the grant, and you have to submit receipts. And so it just means that on the front end, you're tracking down a lot of little budget details and handling a lot of stuff. And then on the back end, you're having to submit receipts, track your time, things like that. So I oftentimes try to find a small number of really big expenses, and keep the applications really simple, because that's less confusion on the part of the reviewer, which is usually a good way to go.
And that's a good point. That's so from a reimbursement standpoint, right? So this is a reimbursement. So you have to submit your expenses, right?
Yeah.
On this. And so if you have those bigger groups anyway, it's a little easier to get that reimbursement. Am I correct in that?
Yes. And that is a good point about the reimbursement too, is that is oftentimes a challenge for a lot of producers as well with cash flow, is that you spend the money up front and then you submit receipts to the rural development office to be reimbursed. And so there shouldn't be anything ineligible after you've gone through the process and been awarded the grant, but it does mean that you've spent that money and then you may not be reimbursed for, a couple months. Technically, you are allowed to submit your for reimbursement every month. But a lot of times your rural development office, they don't want to have to, do it every month. And so they prefer to do it quarterly. And so that can mean that it takes, 4 or 5 months between when you spent the money and when you're actually being reimbursed. And that can be a really big expense if you're processing 100 head, that can be a really big investment. So that's something that you definitely want to be thinking through. And those having some bigger expenses can help, but also that would be the downside of it.
Yeah,
right?
You need to plan for that as you build that out. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for making that point, Mark. I appreciate it. So some just big picture things. I've seen a lot of success with people doing processing commodity. If you're paying somebody $3,000 to process your beef, that $3,000 can be a grant expense. That alone, can easily start to be the whole grant. You can also develop a new product. So you can work with somebody who wants to develop a recipe. You can work with people who want to help you with developing a brand, a marketing strategy for a specific product. You can do things like, milk into yogurt, ice cream, bottled milk. And I've seen people that, each time they apply, they have a slightly different product that they're able to diversify, right? So the commodity is the milk, and then they have several different avenues that they're able to explore. And then increasing their customer base, a lot of contracting in this one. A lot of times you're paying a marketing firm, advertising firm, somebody to help oftentimes do more on the digital side. Shop Local is a great example of this, somebody that can help to reach new customers, even where you are. And so having those kinds of expenses on the advertising, on marketing, on helping to refine your online presence, a lot of that kind of stuff is where we see a big investment in this kind of stuff. And then I would say that the value-added producer grant has a simplified application for projects that are under 100,000. So like I said, for the working capital, you can apply for up to 250K. But if you are at a level where, you just don't want to touch that, that's a big project, that is. And so maybe you only want to apply for 50K, which means the total project is 100. There actually is a simplified application, and it has a lot less scrutiny. And for this simplified application, all you need is verification of financial ability to match the grant. And there's a couple forms that you fill out to show that you have the match. You have to have a work plan for what you want to do with the grant money. You have to have a budget specifying specifically what you're going to spend the money on. And then you have to have a project narrative, which is kind of like a business plan. It's kind of like a feasibility study. It's just an overview of who you are, what you're doing, and you're showing that you've thought through the nuance of the project and kind of like what next steps would be. If you want to apply for above 100K, you then also have to have a feasibility study completed by an independent third party who doesn't have conflicts of interest. And you also have to have a business plan that's completed by a third party. I always work with people, regardless of how much they're applying for, we have the same standard of what we're going to prepare, because even when people apply for less, it seems to really do well when we still have that same content. You're able to submit it. It just makes it a stronger application. And if we're going through all the effort to apply for this, you are thinking through a feasibility study anyways, you're thinking through a business plan, might as well write it down. And then you have that resource that you're able to draw from moving forward. You can apply for other grants. You could, you can use it to get a loan. It's just a really good resource that you can use regardless. So I never really try to luck out and do a simplified one. I'll always, regardless of the amount spent, we still prepare those materials. And also, this is the secret sauce. That reviewers will know if you submitted a business plan and a feasibility study or not, but they're actually not going to be able to see the plan itself. And so you can like write your narrative and reference the business plan a lot and say, and talk about it. And so they'll know if you have it, but they won't get to read it and review it. And so it's always good to have at least something, because maybe they'll think that it's some amazing business plan. And really it's just kind of a simple simple compilation, So that's the trick. That's a trick for you. Write that one down. For grant management priorities, I find they do give you a like a workbook to work through with the application. But I usually don't recommend just starting at the beginning and working down through it, because it's really confusing. It's not ordered really well. It's good from a reviewer perspective, but from a project management or a planning perspective, you wouldn't want to do that, because you'll get caught up and it's not super efficient. And so usually the first step is always going to be register on Sam.gov and make sure that you have a unique entity identity or identifier. This is several weeks backed up, so I'd recommend, hey, pull it up right now as I'm talking and start the process. Do it right after this call. You want to do this if you ever want to do anything with the government. This is a good thing to have, and it's taking a long time. So you definitely want to start that process now. There are lots of paid services online, so you could do that if you'd like. It is a free. You should be able to register for free. And so you want to make sure that you're at Sam.gov. There are a couple of websites that are really easy to find, and they look super official, but they actually are a fee for service. And so they will charge you. Just be aware, just make sure you're on the right site if you're wanting to do it the free version. You feel free to reach out to me. I can help you go through the process. I have a write-up about how to do it. Or other, like your rural development office will help you do it, things like that. So yeah.
No, that's really good. So I have that registry, and when it's about to renew, then you have like all these people that are calling you, and they're trying to help you renew because they're getting paid for it. So just keep that in consideration too. Like there's a way to once you kind of get through the nuances of going through a government run website that has lots of information in it, it's not too bad once you can kind of get through it. But yeah, definitely reach out to Steven on that one if you need some more help on getting that registered.
The first time's always the worst. Yeah. But hopefully, you just hit your head against the wall enough times and eventually you get through, After making sure that you're registered, usually when I'm working with a client, I'll make sure we gather all their previous documents, their records, if they have like financial statements, a business plan, any other grants, that kind of thing. And we focus on making sure that we understand a scope of work and a budget. So what do you actually want to achieve with the grant? And it's kind of different than a business plan, because a scope of work has a very specific start date and a very specific end date, and you have activities that you're trying to achieve, and you have budget items that are associated with that. From there, you determine who else is going to be engaged. For the application, you have to submit letters of support. And so I'll help people write out kind of like letters that they get their partners to sign. So it'd be you get your processor to say that they have reserved a certain number of processing slots for you this year, or you get your marketer to say that they'll provide certain services at a certain price. And it just helps the USDA to know that you're not just, flying by the seat of your pants, that you actually have talked to other people about this, they're in support, and there's validity in what you're saying. After that, we do the narrative and business plan, and then we finalize everything in the workbook, but always starting with a work plan, like a scope of work and a budget. It takes the longest, and it can feel like you're not moving very fast when you're at this stage. And that's also why I recommend starting early, because it can take such a long time to actually flesh out a scope of work. And if you have like 2 weeks before it's due, you're tempted to rush into the narrative. But for every change you make in a scope of work, the narrative changes. And it's kind of like a ripple effect, where there's been so many times that I've fallen into that trap and rushed into doing the end parts first, and then I've ended up having to redo all of it, and it's just so much more work. So I would definitely recommend following a structure like this to save yourself a lot of effort. When you start getting grants, it does get easier to get more over time. The first grant's always going to be the hardest. A lot of people don't have great financial records. Language in a grant is the craziest. You have to register on Sam.gov, and that's a headache. But after you've gone through it, you have some budget numbers that are formalized. You understand who you can rely on locally, like who your local offices are. You have kind of projections, you have products, you have content that's written about these things. The networks that you develop are really helpful. So there's rural development, NRCS, FSA, they have things that happen throughout the year. And if you're in contact with these offices, you're top of mind when something new comes up, right? And so it can be hit or miss depending on where you are, but I think that these people are an amazing resource when you're able to really like have that personal relationship with them. And then from the private sector as well, when you know local marketers, other professional service providers like Chop Local, they oftentimes will have opportunities where they can say, hey, I've, know somebody in your area or somebody's doing something. It just creates new opportunities for cool things to happen. And so
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, like I have a rotational grazing plan that the gal called me and kind of beat me up and said, this was 12 years ago or whatever. She called me and she said, you can there's equip money, there's stuff out there to help you be more productive. And I was like, and so yeah, having that contact at the local NRCS or FSA office is really important, or rural development, because if they see you being a progressive producer, then they're gonna want you to be involved in those other programs as well. So that's a great point. Appreciate that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then also, even if it's not with somebody who's going to come to you and give you opportunities, which there are a lot, people love helping people that are like making things happen. But it also opens you up for more opportunities that are related to groups. So after going through this process, many people have firmly identified and communicated their challenges. So as part of the grant, you're saying, this is a problem that I have, the grant will help me fix it. And so thinking through your business in those terms is often a new experience for people, even though you understand your business any better than anybody. But communicating that to a new audience is a really useful challenge. And so having that, and then also having those relationships with other producers, processors, nonprofits, academic organizations, institutional buyers, it all positions you for more opportunities. A lot of grants want to benefit groups of people. One that comes to mind is the Local Food Promotion Program that focuses on benefiting groups of producers. And I think Shop Local has actually received something similar to that, which helps with like technical assistance and being able to specifically focus on the problems that groups of producers are experiencing and address it in some way. And so when you know how to identify what your problems are and you're able to find other people who have that same problem, it really creates an opportunity to present that to somebody who is in a position to solve that problem. And there are lots of other funding opportunities. So they can help you do a wide variety of things, developing your farm, new products, local markets, improving the health of your land and animals, mentoring, helping engage with other people that are outside of your industry. In particular, right now, there's a large emphasis on local food systems, connecting farms to institutions. So doing like helping local farmers sell to a hospital in the area, right? Where maybe some large contractor from out of state or something would be normally providing them their food. There's a big push right now to say, how can we aggregate local food to meet these needs? There's also a big focus on improving nutrition and then climate smart agricultural practices as well. So there's a lot of exciting stuff. And if you're already doing these things, it just means that there's going to be funding that you can tap into without necessarily changing a lot of what you're doing. So definitely some exciting stuff on the horizon. And for where they're coming from, USDA, NRCS are two really big ones. If you haven't reached out to your local NRCS office, that's almost always where I recommend people start, because they'll walk you through the whole process. They are some of the best people, and it's almost always what you're doing. They'll come to your farm and help you decide what to do, write it up for you. It's a great program. So definitely check them out as well. It's a bit smaller of what you can apply for, but it is very useful, and they can oftentimes support some of the things like the value added producer grant can't apply for. There's also state agencies or like local economic development forums or groups like that. city and county governments, national and local private organizations such as the Veterans Coalition specifically want to support farmers, sometimes based on something like veteran status, sometimes focus on things like if you're doing sustainable or regenerative practices or organic. There's a wide range. So usually people can find something that kind of aligns with what their priorities are. But with understanding that navigating all of these funding sources as they come up and are done, with the eligibility requirements, submission deadlines, it's usually not realistic for somebody who's working 80 hours to actually run a farm. And so I actually have a list of funding opportunities. I also have a newsletter where I send out updates about funding opportunities. It's free. I just think that it's great to be aware of these things. And so if anybody would like to receive those, let me know. Feel free to send me an email, reach out at the website, and we can get you signed up so that you can at least be aware of what's going on, even if you're not ready to step into kind of like applying yet. It's still something that's really good to know about. Overall, grants usually are not going to cover all your farm activities. I like to think of it pretty holistically, where if you're getting funding in, it doesn't really matter what it's for, especially something like a reimbursement grant where you've already spent the money and then you're just getting reimbursed. It's just extra money into the business. So even if we officially say it's for A, it's just extra profit or extra revenue that you could then offset other funding to go into, bucket B. So even if you can't find something specifically, like I know a lot of people that are wanting to build processing facilities, and this grant doesn't allow you to build facilities like that. But if you're receiving $250,000 worth of a grant to process and sell your beef, then you're able to take that extra profitability and invest that into building the processing facility, even though it's not technically for that, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to kind of chat through that a little bit more if anybody would like. So a brief overview about Stewards Unlimited. We help ag organizations grow with confidence. So we've helped secure millions of dollars in USDA funding. That's what we specialize in. This is a couple examples of the farms that we've worked with. They're across the US. We've actually worked with some that are outside of the US, although that was not for the USDA, but we really love agriculture. I have an ag engineering background, and so that's kind of really where I get a lot of my passion from. My team is really passionate about working with farmers. And so this is what we do, right? We help them to identify and evaluate new funding opportunities, design competitive projects, which I like to think of it like a puzzle and step stoning, where we'll talk about what long-term goals there are, and we try to think about how funding is able to get people one step closer to their long-term goal. Because a lot of times it's not exactly where you're wanting to go, but it's all about how we're going to get there over time. And then we help with the writing, the proposal development, all of that. And so we help to actually win the funding. In addition, we love having lots of referral partners, lots of people that are trusted, people that we know do good work. And so we've like becoming kind of like a one-stop shop for a lot of our clients, where we can recommend when, we know people who can help with websites, we know people who can help with marketing or social media, and really be able to make it so that you don't have to go out and find somebody. I always will promote a local service provider above anybody else, because they're going to know your market better and be able to maintain that relationship long term. But a lot of people are too busy. They don't want to have 10 different contractors that they're working with. And so we help kind of bring a lot of that under one roof and simplify. So for next steps, you guys have already done the first step, which is just getting started, seeking new information. This is the hardest thing. You showed up. That's amazing. Good job. I would say that the next thing would be to register on Sam.gov. Make sure that you go and do that. Start the process now. Even if you're on the fence about this or don't plan to apply for this, it's worth just starting the process, because it's something that you'll probably want eventually. I would also encourage you to check out my website. Feel free to reach out to me directly. We can have a conversation about your goals and focus on your farm. with the support from people who are going to take responsibility for your growth. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. Feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, concerns, or smart remarks. Again, I'm Stephen Ussery, and this is my email, my number, and a link to the website as well. So we're more than happy to answer questions leading up. But yeah, I would love to, now we can kind of go through some of the questions and answers, and we can answer some specifics that we're wondering about the program.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Stephen, so much for all that info. And we got a bunch of questions here, but the first one, as far as the Sam.gov, like getting registered on that, you want to make sure that you're doing that under the business name that you're going to ultimately apply for that grant, right? So if you have a farm and then you also have a meat company or whatever, you want to do it under the meat company, or it kind of depends.
Go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
So if you have it kind of separated, how would you address that from a registration standpoint?
I would say that this is really focused on the producer. And so whoever is producing the commodity is the one who needs to be applying for the grant. So if you have two, in that case, I would say probably you want to register under the farm, and then you can use the meat processing facility and your other company. It can work together, but you need to be the one who produced the actual commodity. You can't buy it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. Okay. First question here from Lisa is, seafood producers, what is considered, I missed the first part of this question here. What's considered mid-size?
I do not know, actually. I don't think that the size offers too much. As far as I know, there's not an eligibility that will cut you off if you have above a certain revenue. And so saying that it focuses on small and mid-size is more of a way to encourage people who know that they're small to apply. But if you're a large operation, it doesn't count it against you.
Okay. Christina has a question here. Can you apply for a planning and working capital grant together, or just one or the other?
You're usually going to be choosing one or the other. And there's some activities that, you would have to choose one or the other. So yeah. I think the working capital one is more flexible. And so that's why oftentimes you can kind of frame what you're doing as an implementation with the knowledge that you'll still be doing some evaluation on the front end. But if you're starting from scratch, then it may be better to go for the planning grant.
Yeah. Okay. Can you, Elliot has hey, Elliot's out in Oregon. Are you able to use this to invest in software or subscription-based services that aren't necessarily equipment?
That's a great question. And yes, you can. There are some restrictions. So when you're doing it, you have to make sure that any funding that you're spending has to be specific to the product. And it also has to be, you have to like justify it in some way. So the way I think about it is like, you can use funding to pay to do some of your website. You can't redo the whole website for your entire farm and all of your products, but you can do some web development specifically for the product that the grant is for. And usually, I mean, if you're getting a contractor involved, you can kind of have them do a lot of work that will make it so that it's a lot easier and cheaper to then, after the grant is done, update a lot of the other parts of your website fairly quickly. And so there are some ways that you can get more bang for your buck like that. But you have to make sure, and usually this will come down to when you're writing the narrative, you really want to be clear that all the grant expenses are about selling this specific product in some way. Yeah.
Okay. Brian has a question about a mobile slaughter unit. That would probably be considered equipment, correct? Or just the equipment within the unit? and then he goes on, can you cooperate between 2 to 4 producers and a processor and kind of have a cooperative type of a mobile slaughter that you share?
Yeah. So you can apply under more than just an individual producer. So if you have something like a co-op, you can apply. Usually there's going to be it sounds like this is more of an informal grouping. Usually you'd have one probably person that's applying officially, and then you'd have letters of support from the other people saying that, hey, I'm going to supply this much meat. I'm going to supply this many steer, like to make sure it's financially viable. And then you'd have customers that say, hey, I'm going to buy it, right? So that you have enough supply and demand for the processing unit. You can lease that equipment. So you can have a project where you're wanting to do the processing and you can lease it, but you can't buy it outright. Usually, pretty much everything in there is probably going to be above 5K. And so even the 5K mark can be a bit misnamed, because anything below 5K is considered supplies. But if you're using a big piece of machinery that just happens to be $4,500, it's kind of like tongue in cheek where this is a supply.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So kind of along with that, I'm going to skip down here a second. TK Farms has a question. Can 2 neighbors combine their assets to apply for a grant, both contributing equal time and money and assets?
I would think, yeah, because the thing would be that it probably would be simpler for one person to be the actual applicant. And then with the 50-50% like of contribution, just make sure that the main applicant, you'd probably want them to be the person who's contributing a greater percentage of the commodity. And then have the other person just be selling the commodity to the first producer right before production takes place. And they could provide a letter of support that says they will guarantee that they provide that much. And then you could just combine your sales efforts. So you could hire them as a contractor as well to make sure that their time is valued on the grant as well. So I think that's probably a better way than trying to officially apply together. There may be a way to do that, but I'm not aware of it. And I think that what I suggested is probably the simplest.
Yep. Okay. Going back up here. So Todd has a question on, can you use livestock? So you could, if you had a certain amount of livestock, so if you had 10 head and you wanted to add another 10 head to that, you could do that under this, correct?
So you can do it at the point of processing. So if you can't like buy head and then finish them, right? Days. But if you are like, it's on the truck, it's headed to the processing facility, and you want to buy more that can go with them, as long as you're providing 51% of the total commodity, that's allowed.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So are applicants allowed to use all 3 forms of the match? So cash, owner labor, and raw commodity input within the simplified application?
Yes, I believe so. I don't think that there would be any reason why they couldn't do all 3. It's like I said, in the past, there have been incentives to use all cash. And if you're doing the 50K, that gets more realistic through something like a line of credit, but you can use all 3.
Okay. Allison has a question here on, can you use a signed contract to be submitted for basically faster payment processing reimbursement?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Can you use a signed contract instead of a receipt for the contract? Can you use a signed contract and then submit that for reimbursement to kind of speed that timeline up?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it has to be reimbursed, so you have to have already paid the
Paid
fund
for it. Yeah.
right. And so there may not be a receipt. It may be like a work order or something like that. But
Yeah.
I think it does have to be reimbursed. It's going to be hard for them to give you a check before you've done it yourself.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think I've had that on another, it's similar to some other grants. You actually there has to be money transacted
Yeah.
and then you can apply for the.
There's always a catch. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lauren has a question. Is the UEI number the same as an EIN? I don't believe that's, I think it is different, isn't it?
It is. So the EIN, you'll get, I don't actually know, maybe from the IRS. And then the UEI, you'll have to go to Sam.gov in particular. And then you have to provide a fair amount of information about your business. And so you need to have, I think, an EIN before you can even apply for a UEI. They do nicely, though, thankfully. They have a kind of like a checklist. When you go to register, you go there and they have a downloadable checklist of what you need to go through the process. And so I'd recommend going there. You can download that checklist and go gather everything together. And then you can go through in one fell swoop, hopefully, and be able to get it all done.
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch of questions coming in here. So let's look here. So can the value added producer grant be used to fund feasibility studies, business plans, and any PA studies for other grant opportunities down the road?
Any PA study? What was that?
Yeah, in NEPA studies.
NAPA. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you said NEPA. Yes. So the planning grant is able to pay for exactly for that. It'll pay for you to do a business plan, a feasibility study. Oftentimes it will be like a contracting. So if you have, a lot of times people do like a local academic organization. You can find like just other organizations who can help with stuff like that, to prepare like a big picture overview of what you want to do. Many times, like I would say, like I said before, many times you probably don't need that unless you're doing a planning grant for a really big project. You probably are okay with doing the planning as you're applying for the working capital grant.
Okay. Can you speak on the timelines? So if the application, if it comes out in February, when do you expect to hear for approval and funding, and when can you start?
That's a great point. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. I would say that most of the projects that I work on, we plan for a start date in October. Last year, it was pushed out pretty far. I think maybe until like December or something, but it can vary a lot. They'll work with you though. So you plan for it to be a certain time, and then they go through a negotiation process where if they say, all right, we want to give you the funding, you sign an official contract. And throughout that process, they'll say, well, this is when we actually think the funding will become available. And you have an opportunity to adjust your timeline according to that. They're also not usually super strict on the implementation timeline. I've seen a lot of people move up their grant. So if you plan to process and sell over a year period, but you start marketing and your demand skyrockets and you're able to move some of your processing up, you're able to actually move a lot of those payments up in time to be reimbursed sooner and then close out the grant faster than you otherwise would have.
On the USDA website from last year, it mentions a 10% match rather than the 50%. Is that on that smaller grant number, right? There's a 10% match for like a small project or something.
So that actually, I think I misspoke earlier. The 10% was because of COVID money. And so for the last 2 years, not the year before last, I think all of it was 10, where you only had to provide a 10% match. And it was amazing because you could apply for $250,000 with, you know, a $25,000 match,
Yeah.
which is an amazing project. And then last year they had a small pool of funding that still had that 10%. I'm not expecting that to happen this year. I think
Okay.
probably all that money has been used up and it'll be back to the 50% match, which is how it's been in the past.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming up on time here, so I want to get through a couple of these other ones here, and then any other questions that are in there, we'll address those, and we can get back to you on any of those. But some of them are pretty specific questions that you'll probably have to kind of dig into a little bit here. So with the planning grants or the working capital grants, you need third party input. Does that include working with you and Stewards Unlimited, or what does that entail?
So I think you're talking about the like the feasibility study or the business plan that are completed and like validated by a third party.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times many times what I've looked at doing is we'll help prepare materials and then finding a local resource. It can be like a technical service provider locally from academic institution or some kind of farmers group. And we can get them involved in the process as well, where we're providing a lot of the information and kind of the content, and then they're able to evaluate it and say, does this actually look like a good plan, right? So, because if I'm helping you to prepare the grant, there's a potential conflict of interest if I'm also helping you prepare the business plan. A big part of preparing the grant is preparing a business plan so that's a lot of what I do with people. But we want to make sure that there's no like, I'm just saying it's a good idea because I want you to do a grant, right? And so we get another party involved that can validate it.
Yeah. Okay, bunch of questions on what do you charge? What's your how does it work with stewards, and kind of what's for what's your fee structure?
Yeah. So I have done this year we're doing a graduating fee structure. So as it gets closer to the deadline and kind of we have more and more people who are wanting to do it, it does get more expensive. And so we've been doing these projects since December. And for those, we've offered a discounted price. And then pretty much every month is where we're stair-stepping the price up. I'm not sure I'll say what it is right here in recording, but reach out to me. It's very competitive. We're passionate about helping people. And really, I see this as an entry level. Like I said, my business, we focus on like working with people long term. We're not trying to gouge people to get a payday today. We're trying to build a lot of the resources out that we need to establish a relationship in order to collaborate long term. And so this is, in my mind, a foot in the door. And we're going to prove why you want to work with us, and we'll have a good time. And then we'll be able to like keep on going from there. Yeah.
I mean, you're a great partner, and it's all about, working together for a common goal. And so a great resource there. And so with that, we're right up at 7:00 right now. So I do want to just go. I'm going to share my screen here quick. And well, it says I can't. You got to jump out of that one.
How do I?
And just recap here.
Not seeing where I can stop sharing. Oh,
Stephen, there we go. I was going to say, click the green button, I think.
It's got multiple screens going here,
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see that all right there? I just want to highlight our next webinar series. Thanks everybody for joining. Our next one is February 21st, and that's Marketing 101 with Selling Meat Online with Matt LaRue from Cornell. And then we'll have more. The next one after that is March 7th. There you can see focusing on social media. And then we'll have a bunch more in the future. So We will continue to answer questions. Feel free to reach out to us. You can get a hold of us here on sell.choplocal.com. And again, you can look at, you can get a hold of Sydney here with this email address, or Stephen here. And with that, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to joining us the next on February 21st. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Do we want to answer a few more questions, Stephen, or do you need to hop off here?
No, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer and chat.
Okay. So we have a question from Sandra, and I think that this has come up a couple times here, and she's still on, I believe. She said, by adding value to a product and increasing sales and marketing, this would necessitate increasing the volume of animals produced. So, and we have a few questions about this. She asked, would fencing be considered supplies and not fixed equipment? Obviously, it might cost more than $500 or $5,000. Somebody else asked about purchasing embryos for a specific breed of cattle that might be a value added, you know, by marketing a specific breed. Supplies like feed, fencing material, storage like freezers. I know that this is a question that comes up commonly, so I'd love to have you cover it again.
Yeah, and I probably should have done a better job of emphasizing this in the presentation. So I'll go back and I'll make sure I add some notes that this is only focused on things that are after the commodity is completely finished. And so we can't really use the funding for anything that's related to production. So the fencing is a production expense. So with the embryos, a freezer is eligible because that is a supply as long as it's under 5,000. That's considered a supply. So you could buy 10 small freezers and rent a space, you know, that you can use to store them, because that's after the product has already been processed and it's just waiting to be sold. So those are eligible, but yeah, unfortunately, anything like feed related to production is not eligible.
So you could lease that space though. So if somebody has a large commercial type freezer or something like that, you could lease that, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And many times that's an easier grant, to be honest, than like doing a bunch of smaller purchases. But you know, there's a toss up between the idea of if you're leasing something, then the grant is done and, you know, it's kind of over. Whereas if you buy something, then when the grant is done, at least you have some kind of asset afterwards as well. So thinking through that kind of thing and like what's actually going to benefit your farm longer term, even if it's less of a benefit right now, but it's kind of better, maybe depending on your situation, can be kind of like a nuanced discussion to have.
Okay.
So a couple of questions about matches. Dan is still on and he asked, are matches eligible to be fulfilled through other funding, like other grant awards? And then Maria asked, can you purchase equipment as your match?
So for using other funding, you have to have the funding available at the time of application. And so there are some situations where you could use other funding as a match, but it's unlikely because most other funding that you have has to already have something earmarked for it, unless maybe you're a nonprofit and you just have like a general operating budget, like you have funding from somebody else where you can use it for whatever you want. I would double check. And so if you want to follow up with me via email, I will double check about this. But my impression is that would be fine as long as you can show that you have that money and it's available to be earmarked for the match when you apply. And then the second question was, could you repeat the second one?
Yeah, can you purchase equipment as part of your match?
You can, it depends on the price. So if it's under 5K, and there's also technically it's like a double description. So it has to be, it depends somewhat on its useful life. So it could be over 5K if it won't last longer than a year. There are very few pieces of equipment that actually would qualify for that, so that's just for really expensive supplies, things that you would actually think of as supplies that are really expensive. They also don't want to really support, but yeah, so usually if it goes above that 5K, you can't purchase it outright, but you can rent it. And it can be an opportunity for you to you can't usually give money to a family member. So you can't, which can be really challenging for a lot of people if their brother is the only person who owns a processor, within 100 miles. But, if your buddy buys the piece of equipment and knows that you're going to lease it from him, who's to say that you couldn't do that, right? So you can lease it from an organization, and if there's a letter of support from somebody saying, I have this piece of equipment, I'm able to lease it to them for this price, for this long, that might be a bit underhanded, but it's, yeah.
What about like in the case of shipping, what about shipping materials like boxes, coolers, et cetera?
Yeah.
That would handle, even if that is, if you get a semi-load of those, that would qualify, correct?
Yeah, because the individual pricing of those is under 5K. So that actually is
Okay.
oftentimes a pretty big expense, is like the boxes, the postage, the like coolers for like ice packs that you put into if you're mailing something that needs to be refrigerated. A lot of those things that really adds up. And so that can be a large expense for the grant.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, along those lines, Christina asked, I'm going to read it, but I think that this is like the perfect project from my understanding. So she wants to introduce pre-prepped meals ready to cook, or like a ready-made meal to go. She wants to lease a kitchen space with equipment to make the product. And could she use the grant dollars to lease the kitchen space, and then to purchase the ingredients that go along with the commodity, that is going to be used to create this meal?
Yes. I need to double check about when there are so many different ingredients. And so with the stipulation that you have to produce 51% of the commodity, I want to make sure that there's no problem if you're making a box meal and your commodity is only 10% of that meal. Like where do they draw the line there? So I'm trying to follow up with people to really understand that better. I think it should be fine though. So I would imagine that is the type of product, as long as you're producing the commodity that's being used in the meals, and we can show that it is a large portion of what is being sold.
One other one here is, when you're registering for SAM, do you recommend registering for financial assistance awards only, or register for all awards?
I don't know. I would say financial assistance only is probably fine. I can follow up though. If you want to email me, I will reach out, because I registered for all just because I never wanted to do it again.
Yeah.
That I don't want to say that though, and then that be something that takes twice as long, and I don't understand the nuance of that registration process. So I don't want to say officially, but I can follow up.
Okay. And then Elliot had another question here. As a harvester, do you have to sell the products yourself, or can you apply to attain certification in which will benefit other producers?
So you can sell other producers' produce. You can in the project, you can up to 49% can be from other producers,
Okay.
but you couldn't be only a seller. So you have to be a harvester as well. You can't just be the person who buys it at the dock.
Okay. So, and it's a butcher shop. And so, so they're harvesting. Okay.
Okay, we're almost through our list. For this one, are there preference points for minority applicants?
Yes, or at least there have been repeatedly in the last couple of years. So we would expect that there will be.
Great. Somebody else asked a livestock trailer to transport to processing. Would that be an eligible expense?
So it's weird. They draw the line at transportation to the processor is usually not eligible, which is such a weird line to draw, you know? You probably could lease it in the sense that you could justify having the trailer to transport it back from the processor. Like get a trailer, put some coolers in it, maybe do a generator with like, actual like freezers in it. Everything under 5K, you can make yourself a little makeshift, farmers market trailer, like something like that. All those individual pieces, you could do the individual pieces as an application, and then you could like lease the trailer. The trailer's probably going to be over 5K, so you probably can't buy it outright, but you can lease it.
So you could just haul your meat back in the front side of the trailer in the refrigerated section, right?
Yeah.
I'm just, there's a lot of loopholes. So
yeah, I don't know if I understood what you
no, it's funny.
Okay, last one. What's the difference between the feasibility study and the business plan?
So that's a great question because, usually business plans are something that are completed internally, and feasibility studies are kind of like a third party assessment. Maybe a good way to distinguish it would be a business plan usually says, this is how we're going to do it, right? A business plan would include something like a work plan. It identifies your target market. It identifies your need and your competition. And it says like what you're going to do. And it has a financial projections. It has a pro forma. This is how much we expect to sell. This is how much we expect to earn from the project. And then a feasibility study is more like is it true, right? Do they have the market? Are there enough people who want to buy this product in this area? And many times it's just going to cross over, because if you're writing a good business plan, you're going to answer that question and you're going to cite it from a third party and say, we know that it's feasible. And we took that into consideration while preparing a business plan. But a feasibility study is more holistic oftentimes. Although it should probably go into like the management capacity and showing, have these people done something like this before? Do they have the resources they need? Do they have the assets that they need to keep it going? Yeah, it's not maybe as easy as an answer as it should be.
Okay, Todd had to chase down a horse, so I think he got him chased down. He has a ranch with a feed mill and a feed yard, and then he's also has a USDA harvesting facility on site as well. And so, but it's all one entity. Is that gonna be a problem as you apply for this, or is that?
It shouldn't be. There may be some things that I'm not thinking about right now that could be stumbling stones, but as long as you're producing it, you can also be the one who does the processing. As long as you're the producer, and you have to retain ownership of the commodity through the processing process, and then into the sales process. So there probably are going to be challenges with like how you set up your budget, but it wouldn't change your eligibility, I shouldn't think.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we'll make sure that Todd gets a hold of you, because I think you can probably answer some other questions for him. So that's awesome. Katie, do you have anything else?
No, I think we're ready to wrap it up.
All right. Well, thanks again for those that stuck on. We got a few that are left that stuck it out all the way through. So appreciate that. Again, we'll continue to have other webinars and other resources. And so just keep checking back at that sell.choplocal.com and definitely reach out to Stephen and his team at Stewards Unlimited. And with that, we'll wrap it up. I appreciate everybody for sticking with us.
Thanks so much, everybody.